Hello, everyone. Welcome to Genealogy Adventures. I'm Brian.
And I'm Donya. How you guys doing today? It's kind of gloomy, but we got a little bit of sun every now and then.
I see now we've swapped. It's gorgeous down here. Humid. It's South Carolina. I'm keeping it real. It's hot and humid, but yeah, it's a gorgeous day.
Yeah, it's still hot. Don't get it twisted.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, as always, thank you so much for following us for the next, tuning in for the next hour. No matter how you're doing it, I'm going to kind of get right into it because we got a lot to cover today and we have a barnstormer of a show. So, without further ado, I am really pleased to welcome to the show Annaliese M. Bruner. She's a writer editor who advocates for historical literacy in the name of her ancestor, Mary Jones Parrish. She partnered with Trinity University Press in the successful 2021 publication of The Nation Must Awake, her great-grandmother Mary Jones Parrish original narrative of surviving the Tulsa Massacre, and a tripartite volume that includes the afterword Annaliese wrote as the heir to her ancestors' legacy. She recently completed a screenplay called The Little Red Book, which is based on the book, and she's currently marketing that screenplay. And without further ado, welcome to the show, Annaliese.
Thank you so much, Brian and Donya. I am thrilled to be here with you, and I look forward to a productive and fun conversation.
Well, and I'm sorry, it's Annalisa. And as we said in the green room, both of us are really excited because we have wanted to do a show about the Tulsa Massacre for at least the last 5 seasons, and we just have not found the right person, and we finally did. So patient, good things do come to those who wait, even if it's going to be a difficult conversation.
Agreed.
So, I'm going to say I did not hear about the Tulsa Massacre until, and I can't remember the exact year, but it was the in Philadelphia, it was the 80s, it was the bombing of the MOVE organization, a collective of Black people that the government didn't like, and they literally bombed them. And I remember my DC grandparents and my two great grandmothers, who are still very much alive, saying that it immediately reminded them of Tulsa. And they made that connection. And then I asked them, well, what's Tulsa? What does that have to do? And they explained it from their perspective. So that's kind of my introduction to it because y'all know I didn't get it in school, not touched on in school in any way, shape, or form, at least not the school I went to. And the first question I wanted to ask you, Annalisa, was, is this a story that got handed down that you remember from a child? Or at what point did you become familiar, not only with the history, but your family's connection to it?
Thank you so much for that question. That really is the origin story of my advocacy. And my knowledge of Tulsa, although I grew up in a descendant family, didn't happen until I was almost 35 years old. My father, who was Mary Jones Parrish's grandson, hid it from me, hid it from us. We didn't know. And when I turned 35, I was living in Washington, D.C., but I had gone home to San Francisco, where I was born and raised. And my father took me aside and said he had something to talk to me about and something to give me. I was confused because my father was normally a really kind of jocular guy, kind of backslapping, happy-go-lucky kind of person. But he was uncharacteristically serious, solemn, somber even. So I went with him into his room and he closed the door. And he went over to his stack of papers that, like everybody has one. And he sifted through and pulled out an envelope, with a large-ish envelope, manila. And he pulled out a little book. It had gold lettering on it, very faded, red, covered with red cloth. And the name of the book was Events of the Tulsa Disaster by Mrs. Mary E. Jones Parrish. Still nothing was registering. I had never even heard my great-grandmother's name.
Oh, wow.
So there was a huge rupture in our family after my grandmother left Tulsa. And he said, Lisa, he called me Lisa. He said, Lisa, I wanted to share this with you. This is your great-grandmother. And she wrote about this horrible disaster that happened in Greenwood, in Tulsa, where I grew up. I opened the book and looked through it, and right inside the original book, of which there were about 25 copies produced in 1923, was this kind of panoramic shot that opened up, unfolded about 8 panels, and you could see this area, this neighborhood, completely destroyed. So he didn't tell me too much about it, but what he told me was, after you read this book, I want you to see if you can do something with it. And I was confused. I didn't know exactly what. And he said, because now you're the matriarch of the family. So all of these bombshells were coming on me at one time. No one had passed away. There wasn't anything, life event that said, oh, okay, now it's the passing of the torch or something like that people might typically experience when someone says something like that to them. So this was all out of the blue. I was at home in San Francisco visiting for the Christmas holidays. And this is the gift that I got, this huge charge and responsibility that I, was completely unprepared for. I didn't know when he took me in the room, what was he going to say? Was he going to say he was sick? All manner of things went through my head. And then once I had an opportunity to read the book itself, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to believe. I could not imagine that no one, neither my father nor his mother, whom I did know growing up, she lived in San Francisco as well, not a mumbling word. And, as I've worked on this project and this advocacy to bring not only this original story, this original narrative forward, but also to resurrect the reputation and legacy of Mary Jones Parrish, who has basically been buried, and lost to history. As I've worked on that, I've had encounters with other descendants who also said their parents as survivors, their grandparents as survivors, hid it from them because it was too horrible to talk about.
Okay, so I have a kind of two-parter. So one, I want to touch on what it felt like to have the burden of that responsibility that your father tasked you with, because not all of us actually experienced that. But first, you said something really interesting. Did you ever find out why your father hid this history from you?
No, but he didn't talk about home much at all, period, when we were younger. And it was on my maternal side where I learned so much about my family on that side. But my father's family was a bit of a mystery. I did know, however, and it may have been too painful to talk about, not just descending from Tulsa, but my father's father was killed in the Pacific Theater in World War II when my father was 8, and he grew up as an orphan. He was raised by his grandmother, his father's mother, but his mother was devastated by all of these events. She went to California when he was a child still, looking for her estranged husband, not really thinking, not really believing maybe that he would never be coming home. He was in Burma and had died, and when his remains were returned to California, several years had elapsed. And so he is buried at Golden Gate National Cemetery in San Bruno, California, on the same section where Admiral Nimitz is buried. But coincidentally, his father, who fought in World War I, is also buried there. So my grandfather was interred there, I think in 45 or somewhere around there. I'm not quite sure. I haven't looked at the headstone in a while. And my great grandfather was interred there in 1951. And so both those Oklahoma natives, you know, are buried in places of honor. At the same time, for my grandfather, who was lost in the Pacific, it's a tragic story for my grandmother. And so she lived through Tulsa when she was 7 years old. She went to college and got her degree in teaching at Langston University there. the only HBCU in Oklahoma, went to San Francisco in search of her husband, also to try to find a teaching job, which was not available to her as a Black woman. And so she ended up working for the San Francisco school district, but as a janitor rather than as a teacher. Although she had placed very high on the teacher exam, they would not hire her in that capacity. And so it is somewhat of a tragic story. And so much of this, my father just didn't talk about. I discovered these things over time, much of it once I became an adult. So these were not things that were discussed. They were kept from us. And I imagine that the whole Tulsa ordeal probably fell into that category in his thinking in terms of what he should share with his children.
Also, that's a long history of pain and trauma. And trauma. I mean, especially if you're, orphaned at a young age, even if you are raised within your family, you still don't have your parents. And
I'm very moved by that, because I'm looking at it as there's two different sections from it. One is he's not telling you about the Tulsa because you may have been too young to know about it, and he waited to give you that info. But then, was he old enough to even know all of the stuff that you just found out about your mom, about his mom? And did mom share that information? So I find that it's a fascinating story in itself. And as traumatic as it is, your great grandmother was fascinating just because. I don't want to live on the trauma of her. I want to live on the fascination of her. I want to live on right now. I am literally just I'm taken aback from everything that she's gone through and what she's still accomplished in doing that. And I love her for it. I think it's absolutely awesome.
and the second part of that question is, your father presented you with a huge ask, really. Do this story justice, do it, what happened to your family justice. How long, what were your immediate feelings about it, and how long did it take for you to just to process that?
Well, that was in 1994. And that same year, I left my job and changed my career so that I could start to begin to think about how I might do justice to this. What would be the avenue? What would be the format? All these kinds of things, because I really had no idea. I had always been a writer and an editor, not formally, but I worked in a consulting firm. But I was always a person. No matter what job I ever had, I ended up being the informal editor, because that was just always my thing. I was an English major in undergrad, and was always not necessarily in love with writing, but I'm a strong writer. And that's just, one of the things that I always gravitated toward. And so I began to take steps to formalize that. I left the job I was at, and it was because in my marriage, my now ex-husband had just finished, like, I think, residency and fellowship, and was now fully employed. And I thought, okay, now it's my turn, and I have this perfect project that needs my attention. I took all manner of editing classes. I took screenwriting. I took travel writing, all kinds of different writing courses, editing courses, language courses, just to prepare myself so that when, and again, I was still very green about this and what I was going to do, so that I would be prepared. And I began working at a magazine. I took like a very serious hit to my pay, but I was committed, and I was all in. I started working at the BET family of magazines right here in DC. And coincidentally, when I started working at BET Weekend magazine, I met another person who was a Tulsa Massacre descendant. And it was the first time I mentioned that and found out there was a whole community of people. But like my situation, she grew up with that knowledge. And so when I was talking to her, that just seemed like a completely different dimension to me, because, I thought, oh, I must be the odd person out. I'm the only one who came from one of these families who who wasn't told about this until adulthood. And so that was a very strange and interesting exchange. And in fact, her ancestor was one of the very prominent members of the community. And after the massacre, he left for Chicago, probably to preserve his person.
Now, in her book, your ancestor Mary did a wonderful job, giving a timeline of everything that was happening around the massacre itself. And for the benefit of our audience who may be very unfamiliar with the Tulsa Massacre, as I said in the green room, I expect we're going to get a lot of younger people that have expressed an interest in this particular episode who don't know anything or very, very little about it. Can you guide us through that timeline of events?
Yeah, absolutely. I can do a condensed version of it with just the highlights, of course. On May 31st, I'm trying to think about the starting point, because going back and forth here. On May 31st is when my great-grandmother, Mary Jones Parrish, was in her apartment. She had just finished teaching class and was retiring for the evening. And she says it was about 9:30 p.m. She was reading a book, and her daughter, Florence, my grandmother, was standing at the window looking out into the spring night. They lived on Greenwood, directly, right near the major intersection of Greenwood and Archer. And so when you say deep Greenwood, this is deep Greenwood. This is Greenwood. Black Wall Street. They were right at the heart of the community and of the fighting. And so what happened was my grandmother, 7 years old, at the window says, "Mother, I see men with guns." Now, put a pin in that. Earlier in the day, May 31st, Dick Rowland had been arrested because he was downtown working in the Drexel building. It was one of the few places where African Americans were permitted to use the facilities. But to get to the toilet, he had to take an elevator up to the floor where they could use the bathroom. In those days, of course, the elevator had an operator. There was a young woman, a teenager, maybe about 17, Sarah Page, a white teenager, operating the elevator. Some event happened in there. Probably the elevator jumped or something. He may have stumbled, and she let out a kind of a shocked gasp, but not really like, oh, someone's attacking me gasp. But in any event, knowing the environment, the time, he fled. And someone, a white man who saw that, immediately went to, attempted assault. So they called the police. Some sensational op-ed was written in the white newspaper, and encouraging people to, and I use these words in quotation marks, nab Negro for attempted assault or something like this. And it whipped the white community into a frenzy. So on May 31st, Dick Rowland was at the courthouse where the jail was, at the very top of the building, and a mob was gathering. Now, about 12 months before, 11 to 12 months before, a white prisoner had been in that same jail, and they came and took him out and lynched him, hung him from a billboard just outside of town. The police were complicit. The police chief basically turned that fellow over to the mob. And so the Black community did not have confidence that Dick Rowland was going to be protected. So once they heard that a mob had gathered, a group of Black men from Greenwood got together, and many of them were veterans. They had their Army issue clothing on, they had their Army issue rifles, these kinds of things, and a limited sized group went down to offer their assistance to Sheriff McCullough, who was a different sheriff than had been on duty the previous year when this white boy, basically, I think he was a teenager as well, got turned over. The sheriff said, "No, we don't need any help. You boys go on back home." Well, they retreated, but then they got news that the crowd was growing. And probably the crowd was growing because people were incensed that Black people would dare to come down and challenge the status quo and try to stop this potential lynching. They knew why people were gathering. So by the time they heard that news, they went down with about 75 people, which was more than double the size of the original foray down to the courthouse. And by the time they got there, the white crowd had also expanded to 1,000 or more people. A recipe for disaster. And sure enough, some white man was demanded of a Black veteran, what are you doing with that gun? This and that, blah, 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 tried to wrest it out of his hand, and a shot went off. And then the melee started. They hunted Black people down, killed them in movie theaters, killed people on the street, forbade ambulance or doctors whose offices were down there to attend to people laying on the ground, riddling them with bullets. I mean, just the beginnings of the massacre. And so this was the first kind of skirmish. The Black people retreated to Greenwood to defend the community because they did have, they had come from the war as well, the Great War, World War I, and many of them had combat experience in Europe, France, Belgium, fighting against, obviously, the Germans. So they did their strategic thing, positioning themselves. But the fighting, once it started, actually subsided after a while. But that was just a lull in the planned invasion. And they know that it was pre-planned, and this was just a pretext because of the things that they had in place. They had ambulances already in place. They had, detention camps already set up. And once the word was given, this whistle kind of blew on the morning of June 1st at about 5 o'clock in the morning. They heard this strange whistle, and that was the signal to descend and invade. Now, when I say invade, I use that word specifically because after 103 years, last year, the U.S. Department of Justice, Emmett Till Cold Case Division, finally did a high-level investigation, a review and evaluation of the massacre itself. And the determination was this was a highly sophisticated, well-coordinated attack at the military level. And so they presumed that about 8,000 to 10,000 people had gathered from all around and were invading invading Greenwood. Now, when I say that number, it's important because Greenwood was a community, an enclave, an African-American enclave of about 10,000. So when you have a battalion of 8,000, maybe 10,000, that's almost a 1-to-1 for every resident. Some marauder coming in, killing, at will. The police deputized any white person who showed up. So they were deputized to go in. And this is why, this notion of deputizing people to have those kinds of powers in a civilian population, very dangerous, and it speaks to a certain intent. There were boys as young as 10 who participated. There were white women who'd had an opportunity to, and this tells you really that this was known in terms of what was going to happen. They went home and got their shopping bags. And as the marauders moved through the community very, very systematically, they killed, arrested, or drove out the residents. People came through with shopping carts, shopping bags, and trucks backed up to people's homes. Because we must remember, this area was full of professionals with very fine homes. Some people lived in shacks, some people lived in mansions. That's just the way it was. And they removed things of value, and then they torched. And so they were clearing the land for a land grab. This is what the ultimate motivation was. And
I'm gonna just jump in really quick. Donya,
yeah,
what does that remind you of? Seneca Village in New
Seneca Village.
York.
Not
They did
just
the
Seneca
same thing.
Village, it's Seneca Village, the Faisonville. It's
But
it's it's all of
our
them. Yeah.
yeah,
Seneca Village is the one that really springs to mind because the same thing happened where they were chased out of their homes, not given time to pack anything, and then people went in and robbed them, stripped
yeah,
them of whatever they
Yeah.
left behind.
Yeah, it's a mix of them. It's just different ways of ridding them out of their place. I'm sitting here trying not to. Go ahead.
And the thing that was particularly unique about Tulsa, it's the only time that aircraft have been used to bomb Americans on American soil. And the thing that
until
always
until
that always
until Philly, right?
Until move, yeah.
but that was the first time, and it was also it was doubted. If you'll see articles, some random things that came out, it wasn't heavy coverage that happened after Watchmen and so forth. But there was an article I can recall, I think it was in the 90s, from the New York Times, and it was like, it's community lore that there were airplanes, and I'm looking at my great grandmother's eyewitness account where planes were used, and as they fled into the countryside, they saw the hangars being
Mm.
pulled out, the planes being pulled out of the hangars, and people taking to the skies with rifles and all kinds of things. They shot people from the aircraft. They dropped turpentine bombs on buildings to burn them down. And in addition, there were machine guns set up, particularly the one at the top of the granary at Greenwood and Archer, where when my ancestors were fleeing, they were fleeing the bullets from that machine gun. And so as I look at the book and read through the book, I see the moment in history where my existence may never have happened,
That part.
because if both of them, or just my grandmother, had been killed at that moment, I'm our whole family line is finished.
How did you? I mean, in reading, that's what you just said. Literally, is what made me shake my head and sit back, because as you're saying that, I'm like, oh my gosh, she was almost not here to do this show. That was my thought process. So in reading it, and that's just for me hearing you. But as you was reading this book, if you was reading this firsthand account of everything that went on, how did you grasp it? How did you deal with this? Like, God.
I thought to myself, this is a unique experience to look at not just, kind of generally, my family was there, and
Oh no, you
something
can
could
do
have
that.
happened, but it's like a particular discrete singular moment in time where over those those minutes from the time when the bullets were coming into the apartment, possibly, they were hiding from being shot, and the marauders were advancing, which is why she left her building in the first place, because she felt that they would be incinerated if they stayed inside, which they would have been because the building was destroyed. And some people did not leave on time and were burned to death, while some of them may have been asleep still. But in any event, uh, you know, uh, remains were found in the rubble, who had been incinerated. But that's why they ran out when they did, even though the bullets were flying. They were caught between, two ways to die. And so she prayed, and she said she looked at her Bible and read a psalm, and then they hurriedly left. And then a voice cried out, and she notes this in the book: "Get out of the street with that child, or you both will be killed." And they just ran north, and I always think about that, running north to safety. That has been a trope for us, seeking freedom, safety, whatever. And so she was seeking, having been caught in this conflagration, and then reaching a crescendo and a crucial moment, she had to make the decision. And she just took her child by the hand, said her prayer, and ran out the door. And mercifully, they were spared.
Now, there was something in your great grandmother Mary's book. Sorry, construction's going around where I live. That really, and I hope I remember this correctly because it really stuck with me. She wrote about the bloodlust that she saw in their eyes. And the way that she put that, for her to have written that, she saw their faces. She must have seen their faces up close, and those faces must have haunted her nightmares for the rest of her days.
Well, I had never been to Tulsa before 2021, as I've you all know, and I'll just reiterate here. In 2021, we did republish under the title "The Nation Must Awake," and during the celebrations there, which was the centennial year 2021, I did visit Tulsa for the first time, met a lot of my family for the first time, and visited the spot where the building had stood during my great grandmother's time. Uh, it was fairly close quarters. So when they were looking out of the window, I mean, it's like being on not a wide avenue, a street really. And so they were on the second floor, but if people were out of the window, outside, running around, doing whatever they were doing, and there were men passing by doing drive-bys. They were in their cars, overfilled with their rifles hanging out, picking people off who were on the street. So drive-bys are nothing new. Just like Heather was killed in Charlottesville, they ran their cars into people. They tied people to the backs of trucks and dragged them to death. Like this gentleman, Mr. Bird, if you'll recall. So all
In
of these
Texas.
things, I just repeat and repeat. These atrocities are not new. They are horrific in the imagination have to conceive that people would, come up with these ideas and then feel uninhibited enough to act on them. The most barbaric of behavior. And so, not just death, but, a horrific, death and mutilation. So these things are, you can see why somebody might want to keep that under the lid.
And as you were saying that, I was trying to think of a kinder way of saying it. I'm just going to say it. As you were saying, this is nothing new. Because really, this was the latter chapter of a really bloody period for African Americans in this country, and we call it the Red Summer, the Red Summer of 1919. As you were saying, we had a lot of African American men coming back from serving in World War I. They were military trained. I guess White men were freaked out because these men were soldiers. They had killed white men. Clearly, that was part of their training and part of the reason why they were in Europe fighting in the first place. Coming back, they had weapons. The black men were like, you know what? We're not going back to sharecropping and we're not going back into the old system. We fought for this country. We've lost compatriots and family members who died defending it. We're not going back. And that set off just a bloody rampage all over the country, from Valdosta, Georgia. I can't think of the place in Florida, but the number of
Oh,
lynchings. Thank you. I knew you were going to remember. Just the sheer volume of death, and none
well,
of
I
it
just want
deserved.
you to know that I'm not saying nothing because I can't. So I'm
But I'm also going to.
I'm literally like angry right now. I didn't even think I was gonna normally, and Brian can tell you, I normally don't get angry over stuff like this because I read about it all the time in my research. I deal with it all the time in my research. But when I tell you that the stuff that you're telling me right now um is literally like making my blood boil.
Well, you better
I'm
hold on because I've got
I
a couple more examples.
and my blood is boiling. And even though, yeah, like Brian said, Donya, what does this remind you of? And I can say, yeah, it reminds me of this. That stuff, and I'm sorry, didn't piss me off the way this is. It's
I
not
want
angry.
to.
So
I want to just.
I'm sorry if I'm not asking. Don't think that I'm not interested. I'm just really, really angry right now. And I
And I'm
don't want
hoping
to.
that in the next 5 minutes, hopefully I can give you some grace to be able to work through that. But it didn't stop there. We've seen the same bloodlust in the eye during school desegregation. Sorry, Donya, this may actually trigger you even more. I was again thinking about that the look in people's eyes as Ruby Bridges was going up those steps. I was thinking about those eyes when Governor Wallace in Alabama during school segregation, the white people, and the senseless hatred and the bloodlust. They were just looking for a reason. Thank God nothing set them off. But you just see it over and over again, even as late as 1970s Boston. You look at those photographs. Boston, Massachusetts, New England, everyone always thinks that New England is really chill on the racial front. Nope. Nope, 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 nope. Um, Boston's still a segregated city, and it was a hateful city in the 70s with segregation. I know that because I had a family member who was attending university at that time in Boston. It's just rinse, wash, repeat. And you would think that something as horrific as Tulsa would have actually finally put a pin on it. But you're right, it was ignored. I've gotten into this argument with British people online, on specifically on TikTok, going, "Where were you during Tulsa?" They're like, "Oh, what's happening to your country now is horrible." This has been happening to Black people and Native Americans since the beginning. Where were you all then? Where was your moral
Absolutely.
outrage then?
Absolutely. And one of the really interesting things that you should bring Europe up, and the dynamic of Black veterans returning and stuff like that. Well, when white veterans returned, they were angry that they didn't have jobs, and always the kind of the whole economic thing, which sometimes is a justification and sometimes it's just an excuse. But what this country did, and this is very, very important, when those folks were over there treating Black service members uh, like human beings, I can't put it any other way. This country said, no, if you don't institute the same segregation practices that we have here, we're going to cut off aid to you all. Does that sound familiar at all? You do
Mhm.
our
Mhm.
you do our nefarious bidding, or else we're going to cut off, in that case, war aid. And so, when I think about my great grandfather, not Mary Parrish's husband, but on the other side, my father's other side, you know, they had to get out of these places because they were going. Many of them were going to be killed because they were fed up and they couldn't take it anymore. And originally, I guess up until like Oklahoma statehood in 1907, it was a relatively, and I use this term loosely, free area of the country, and there's there are a lot of problems with that as well. But once Oklahoma acceded to the Union, same old Jim Crow, and so this 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 had been formerly a promised land that was ripped away. They still built, there were black towns all over Oklahoma, but but Greenwood was the shining star, Black Wall Street. And you'll see in my great grandmother's book, she calls it the Negro's Wall Street. It was one of the first times that terminology has been used in print. And so, she is credited with that. But beyond the situation in Europe, when I read her analysis about, are we in Tulsa or are we in France? Are we in Belgium being bombed like this? Number one, she also was prescient when she said, and this is why I brought up January 6th, if this mob violence is not, it's not squelched, then, these kinds of people, these almost rabid animals, they're going to turn on their own institutions. It's not a matter of if, but when, because that kind of unbridled rage is uncontrollable. And so, the American government did something that these kinds of people didn't like, and they rampaged through the Capitol.
So let me ask you a question,
Oh,
Annaliese.
can I just hop in
one more thing, because
Mhm.
I just want to bring this back to the book where she says, she talks specifically about the 1919 in Washington D.C. And so she mentions that these are very worldly people, and
Mhm.
and I'm thinking again, she did not imagine that in 2021 her great-granddaughter would be there in Washington D.C. This thing that she predicted would happen, where these people would turn on their own institutions, and then that was the opportunity that I took to write the article that appeared in the Washington Post, that kind of set off a chain reaction of events that ended up with my participation in the publication of the book in May of 2021. Please, Donya, please go ahead. I'm sorry, just kind of wanted to.
Sorry, Doug, I've got a task for you. Can you kick Iona off? But first,
I
Iona,
already
stop
did
it.
that. That's been
Oh,
done. I just can't get it right there. She been gone. You know me.
oh, okay.
I work on a whole nother level.
Thank you.
Let me do this real quick question. So do you think that today, in today's society and the things that are going on, because everything that you're mentioning right now is literally it to me, I don't know about anybody else, but it sounds like literally a repeat of what is happening right at this very moment, from the rage that is happening with people, from the fact that people are getting all upset because a black child defended himself, and now there's all this other, all these issues. Oh, we're going to give money because that black child should be in jail, when in actuality he defended himself. Or a 5-year-old baby went and did something that any kid would do, and they are defending this white woman for calling this child the N-word and going off and giving her almost $1 million. And I mean, just all of these things. And then they're purposely and driven because it's on messages where they're setting things up, where they actually come out their mouths and say things like, yeah, we have a racist lawyer. These are words that they're putting out there. We got a racist lawyer to make sure that she gets everything she deserves. So everything is like orchestrated. It's
Yeah.
purposely orchestrated. Do you feel that same type of range of all of these different things? Because right now my blood, this is why God didn't put me then, so I'm trying to figure out why he got me now here, because I can be angry, but I
Well,
can be
I
angry.
do agree that things are working up into a fever pitch. But I
Yeah.
think there's some things that are a bit different. Um, and I'm not going to go into all of that. We don't really have that kind of time. But I believe that there will be some skirmishes, there will be some violence, but some people are going to be very surprised about the resistance that they meet. And that's all I'll say.
Oh,
Well,
I'm in total
I like
agreement
to
with that.
phrase it. I like the phrase because Donnie and I, When people say we are not our ancestors, that's like red flags to Edgefieldian bulls. Just don't even bring that. What we like to say is we have tools, resources, and opportunities available to us to be able to push back that our ancestors could have only dreamt of. They
That
didn't
is
have
Absolutely.
very
these.
true.
They didn't have these things.
And one of the things that I've done, because I don't know how long that the Civil Rights Report, which was issued in just this January, I don't know how long that's going to stay on the website. I've downloaded it and sent it to people across the world, as a matter of fact. I've sent copies of my book across the world because, very basically, some of these things that are in the cloud or wherever the case might be may be altered, destroyed. We don't know. And for me, this is just my plug about books. I love books. People, please keep reading books, because those are things, once you disperse them, nobody can collect all those things up. They can burn books or they can do whatever. That's very symbolic. But people have the means to just drop something in the USPS, send it to a friend in London, send it to a friend in Paris, send it to a friend in Johannesburg, Nairobi, Cote d'Ivoire, wherever. And these things will live forever because they cannot, their power is not that great. The technology is all very sophisticated and all these kinds of things, but the human spirit will continue to prevail, and we will not be erased.
Well, the other thing is this, and when we talk about us and what's possible, we already know that this is really built into a civil war too. We see it, everybody sees it, and if they don't see it, then they're walking around with not blinders on, but an actual sleep mask that's covering, and that's just what is built into. But the difference in what was going on then and what is happening now is that white people don't have to hide like they did then. White people don't have to stay in under the cover and help. Now they come out. And I want people to see the difference in them. Because again, I'm blackety black. Never forget that. I'm the blackest person that you could ever be black. That's her. But in the same instance, I know who my allies are. I recognize my allies. I get who my allies are going to be. And people must realize that there are some white folks out here, a lot more than you know, that will definitely move in that same direction, and they don't have to hide no more.
Well, the thing is, and yes, I know someone personally a white
Yes,
person who was living in West Virginia, who was threatened by the Klan. It's like, keep your mouth shut, don't interfere as we do our thing. But, I don't like the word ally, because you know what? That implies that this is just a black interest. It is not. This
it's
is the
not. You're
interest
right. And
of the
ally
of
was
the
the
of
wrong
the of
word.
the
I'll take that back.
institution of this country, and its professed ideals. And so, it's not. I always hate when people say, "Oh, in the '60s, people marched with us." No, they marched for civil rights, and
Right.
that's something that is a benefit to everyone. And don't get it twisted.
That
Every
part. You're right.
and we all have to own things that are in our interest. We have to confess that with humility,
Mhm.
and it is in the interest of everyone. And so, yes, we are we are we're not that great a number in the population. As Dr. King said, well, what does this talk about? Is there going to be some armed race war? Race war is just a code word in my mind. When I hear whites saying this, a race war, that's a massacre, because neither do we have the population, we don't have the numbers, we don't have the firepower for that. What we're talking about is, it's going to be very much like the Civil War was, white people fighting white people.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure that these reactionary forces really understand how deeply, you know, white people are affected and
They do.
oppose this kind of change in this system. One of the first people, when I spoke to someone, I was working at the time at my office, she found out about my book, and she called me, and she said, when I saw what happened on January 6th, she said, I just burst into tears. This is a white person.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a black and white issue.
No, it's not. You're right.
This country, for some reason, frames, it's a broad world. Everything, uh, it doesn't break down along the lines that you might think.
Right.
And I think that those kinds of people have a certain vision and imagination. It's a warped imagination, but they have a certain imagination about the way they project things are going to go. I mean, these people that have come over here, these Afrikaners, these people, I just don't think that they're prepared for how harsh life in America is and how hard you have to work. And there's no lazing around in the sun. There's some cold winters coming. What do you think you're coming into here? Somebody can prop you up for a little while, but that's not going to last very long. What do you think that life in this place is like? This is a very dog eat dog society.
Yes,
And
it
people
is.
who didn't come up under this and who are not acclimated to our society and our mores, this place is going to chew them up alive. A lot of them. I
So,
predict that many will self-deport.
Annalisa, you actually brought up something really interesting because there is only one group of people who are calling for a race war, and it isn't black people.
That's right.
We've never wanted a race war. All we have ever wanted is to be left alone, to be
That's
free,
it.
to be self-determined like anyone else, and to be left alone. So there's that bloodlust. All of these
All over
people
again.
calling for a race war, there is that bloodlust. That apart from trying to extricate ourselves out of an evil slavery system like Nat Turner, black people have never had. Nat Turner didn't want to do what he had to do. He felt he wasn't given any choice but to break his bonds by doing what he did. The Stoner Rebellion didn't happen because it was inherently in our DNA to be a violent people. We were trying to extricate ourselves from an evil system. I'm going to say it's not the same sometimes on the other side of the fence. It's just the bloodlust for the sense of bloodlust. I don't know how we navigate it. I don't know how we get around it, but I just kind of wanted to call that one out.
It's no navigation. It's not. It's just who they are, and they need to figure it out themselves. It's not for us to figure out. It's for them to figure out. And
Well,
that's where we start to realize that that's your problem, not mine. You need to deal with your problem, handle your
Because
problem, and then come back later, and then we can work together. That's where
I'm going
we
to
are.
say this.
yeah.
Black people since 1619 have bottled up trauma, rage, all those kind of emotions. We are an unexploded powder keg. And I keep telling these races, you sure you want to poke that bear? Is that the bear you really want to poke? Because we've never had a safety valve to
Well, with
release.
that being
That's why
said, I want to because we are like at the ending of the show. And this could be something that we could talk about even more, and actually we would love for you to come back and talk more, maybe go
Mhm.
deeper into the screenplay of what it is that you're going to be doing. So we definitely want you to come back and talk about that, because we didn't
Mhm.
even get a chance to get to that. And but I want to thank you, for really coming in and sharing
Mhm.
your great grandma and your grandma's story. My book is on the way. And I'm gonna have to get my mind right for that. I don't know about you guys, but I have been putting the links up. I want you guys to definitely enjoy it. Brian, you have any? Annaliese, please don't leave when we
Yeah.
sign off. Brian, do you have anything quick to say?
Just to say again, thank you so much for the show, for coming on the show. Obviously, this is an important part of not the only part, but an important part of your family's heritage. And I just really love the projects, specifically the screenplay that's coming out of it.
I wrote it in 6 weeks at the beginning of the year for a deadline of early April. I haven't heard. I've submitted to a few festivals so far, and I had an invitation to go to the Cannes Film Festival this year and pitch it before some producers, but my crowdfunding didn't actually work out, and so now I'm just looking forward to some other goals in terms of getting that out before some people. But speaking of crowdfunding, if people visit my site, they will see that I have AnnaliisaBruner.com. They will see that I do have a platform for that. But this book when my great-grandmother published it, it was crowdfunded. It was a crowdfunded book.
Oh, that's
They
amazing.
knew how important it was for the community. People bought ads. In the new book, The Nation Must Awake, you won't see those ads in the back. But in the original book, you see the ads for the businesses, the hairdressing salons, the shoe parlors, the general stores, the doctors, the dentists. It's amazing. I mean, it's amazing. I only know where about 5 of the copies are. I have one personally, my own family heirloom, which I thankfully did not give to the Smithsonian the way I thought I was going to. I was going to contribute it, donate it to the Blacksonian. But with what's going on there, I'm glad I still have it, and I decided to keep it in my own possession. And so I do have it. One is at Yale's Special Collection Library. There's a woman, a couple of folks in Tulsa I know who have them. And, it's just it's a rare book, and so important. And I'm just grateful that she had the foresight, that she had the wherewithal to know how to put vision into action. And I'm glad that the community received and supported this effort.
And with that being said, that's a great end. I'm Donya.
I'm Brian. We'll see you next week, next Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, at all the usual places.